Let's check out one of Amcrest's 1080p webcams. They have several options, but this is model AWC201-B for black, specifically. While this is a review for this product, I also happen to have a 720p Logitech C270 lying around, so I figured I might as well compare the two. Now, I'm currently using other Amcrest products, namely 3 of their Wi-Fi home security cameras, and I have been very happy with the quality of those items, so I was excited when Amcrest sent me an offer to test this product. Currently, the AWC201 is going for about $35 to $55 depending on where you find it, as compared to the C270, which is going for about $30 to $40. I'll go ahead and skip any unboxing footage because, as you can see, the contents are rather straightforward. Apart from the webcam itself, this model comes with a privacy shield. Simply carefully place it over the lens, allowing it to stick. Be careful not to put it on crooked or obscuring the lens though, since the adhesive can be very sticky and difficult, if not impossible, to remove. The only other thing of note in the box is a quick start guide / manual, which includes things like a product overview, setup, and frequently asked questions. So this is a direct unscaled feed from the Amcrest camera. I left all the camera settings on their default values, which means we're going to have things like auto white balance, auto exposure, things like that. The picture quality is okay at 2 megapixels, but what really impresses me is the field of view. Compared to the C270, which we'll see in a bit, I can see the entirety of my back wall there. Speaking of which, you might have noticed the green screen / tablecloth back there and on my chair. We will be testing that out with both cameras shortly. Alright, so let's go ahead and switch over to the webcam's integrated mic and see how that holds up. Here's what the webcam mic picks up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Obviously, it's not comparable to something like an external microphone of any type, but it's certainly good enough to get the job done if you're doing things like Zoom meetings, work meetings, etc. Now let's bring up the C270 and see how it compares. This time I've scaled up from 720p at about 1 megapixel. So right off the bat you can see that in terms of field of view, the Amcrest camera wins hands down. The C270 is much more zoomed in and my room is practically not visible at all. So if that's actually your main concern, you might as well stop watching and go buy yourself an Amcrest. In terms of color balance, I feel like the C270 does a better job at leveling everything out automatically, but I will come revisit that point in a minute. Now, before I show the audio, one interesting side note about the 270 would be that it doesn't only support the 16:9, 1280:720 ratio. It can go as high as 1280:960, at least from OBS's control panel, although that of course will give you the more squarish 4:3 ratio. I decided not to show that for sake of time and simplicity. Alright, let's go ahead and test out the C270's microphone. So here's what the Logitech cam picks up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, this is simple webcam audio. It's probably pretty similar to the Amcrest, so I'm not going to spend any more time comparing this particular feature. Now for some actual side-by-side comparisons. Let's start with the most obvious. The Amcrest is 1080p, the C270 is 720p. However, resolution isn't everything, because I feel like in terms of raw image output, both webcams are about in the same ballpark of just image quality, at least in my opinion. Then of course we come back to the field of view yet again. With both videos side by side, you can really see the difference. It really gets hammered in, and the Amcrest wins the visibility battle, no contest. For a quick final audio comparison, here is the Amcrest mic quality, and here is the C270's mic quality. Now, before we get into things like color differences, green screen effectiveness, lighting, balance, things like that, let's talk real quick about camera settings. Plainly speaking, Amcrest does not ship with proprietary setting controls. Like I mentioned, I am using OBS to capture this footage, and when you open the Configure Video panel from the Properties window, it simply opens whatever settings your operating system knows how to display. Granted, the default controls Windows 10 does provide seem to cover most of the bases. In the first tab, we have typical color settings, things like brightness, contrast, hue, saturation, sharpness gamma, white balance, which has an auto checkbox, which vastly varies what it looks like, and we will get back to that in a second. And on the second tab, we have physical camera properties that are exposed. So in our case, we can only modify exposure and low light compensation, which to be honest, I don't know what that affects because I haven't been able to notice a difference toggling that back and forth. Logitech, however, does include their own custom webcam control panel with their drivers, so you get a few different options. For example, in the basics here, we have the follow my face, which does its best to zoom in and keep me centered based on where I'm at in the frame. So it pans over there, then if I come back over here, it kind of follows me, and it does its job. It works. They also have things like right sound and right light, which I'm assuming have custom code to try improving on the existing audio-video experience. Other than that, though, all of the controls work as you would expect. Right light does seem to lock auto exposure and gain, so you can disable that if you need to tweak those values. And as we saw with the Amcrest, all these are pretty responsive, and they do what they say they do. So you can tweak that to your heart's content. For my final thoughts, I'm going to start getting into the lighting and color variation of both cameras. So everything from this point on will more heavily reflect my personal experience and will likely be very different from person to person. So because I use a face cam for YouTube or Twitch sometimes, I do like to crop and use the green screen back there and on my chair to cut out as much of the background as possible. And since chroma keying does require consistent and good quality lighting, I like to turn off my automatic camera settings wherever possible and just tweak them until I find something passable. I do record at night, and that means I have a bright LED room light just above and behind me, and since that doesn't light up my face, I also have a bright LED desk lamp pointing at me over there. So let me show you how I go about chroma keying out this green screen background with the Logitech C270. First, we're going to open up the Properties window from OBS, then pop open the Video Control panel. And now I'm going to disable those automatic settings that I talked about earlier, and just kind of tweak it until I feel like it has a pretty good color balance with not too much saturation, and honestly, it looks like it did a pretty good job right off the bat. Just don't want to have too much color in here, and we'll leave it about like this. Okay, then we're going to open up the filters, and as I mentioned earlier, I typically apply a crop effect to get rid of the non-green screen background, but for now, I'll simply apply a chroma key and see what happens. It defaults to green, and you can see the space background there I have as an underlayment, and generally it does a pretty good job right off the bat. Obviously we need to tweak this just a little bit to make it presentable, but you know, with a little bit of adjusting here, you can get this looking pretty good. Certainly not studio quality, but it works well for me. Now let's go through that same process with the Amcrest cam. So open up the Properties, Configure Video, and let's disable that automatic white balance setting. Okay, obviously we're going to need to fine-tune some of these settings, so let's see what we can do. So you'll notice there doesn't seem to be a white balance slider setting that reflects what we had in auto. Auto does a pretty good job of separating the colors, but with that off, it just simply oversaturates to the point where everything appears to be one hue. So I guess I have to leave that on, which might be fine. And there's nothing else really here that I need to adjust. I guess I'll look at hue just a little bit. Maybe like so. And let's go into the filters and see what we can do with a chroma key. So okay, you know, it works. Let's adjust it a little bit. Still getting some of the chair in there, which is typical because, as you can see, without the chroma key, there's a lot of bright white parts in here with the chair. In fact, that being said, let's see if we can't tone down the exposure and or brightness a little bit. And let's leave the chroma key filter on to see if we can't get that chair out of there. Let's turn off auto exposure and turn it down a little bit. It's okay, this has potential. Turn up the brightness maybe? Gamma or gain maybe? No, it's making some changes. Let's go back to chroma key and see if we can't get that removed. So it's passable. So let's leave it at this and see what happens. Okay, so since I got chroma key to work, let's bring something else into frame, and since that auto setting is in there, you'll notice that it's adjusting the colors, and now I look terrible. As soon as that goes back out of frame, though, it goes back and adjusts, and honestly, I can get chroma key to work most of the time. It's just, there seems to be very noticeable artifacts no matter what settings I use. I have tweaked these settings for a much longer time than I wished, and I just can't find a perfect balance. Now granted, it's not that bad. It's just with my environment, like I said, my lighting setup, my perfect combination of things, it just doesn't really work for me as well as the C270 does. I'll let you make your own judgment about the Amcrest webcam, but honestly, it's a great webcam for the price. It's a valid competitor for the C270 and other HD webcams. Would I pick it over the C270? Personally, no. I think for my situation, again, I can't stress that enough, the C270 works better with my lighting and environment. That being said, however, I do think in most other situations, I would have went with the Amcrest webcam. The field of view difference, the 1080p, the color variation, it feels like a good webcam and you can't really go wrong with it. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and it was helpful. Thanks for watching.